Thank you all for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment as the numbers level off here with people joining us in the room. Once again, thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment as people finish entering the webinar room. All right, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jamie Sullivan. I'm the director for the National Center for Rural Road Safety. We're really excited to have you all join us for something that we're trying out, which is a free half-day virtual mini conference. This particular one is about applying the safe system approach for rural. In all of our webinars, as many of you know, we do an evaluation at the end and we ask for what topics you'd really be interested in hearing more about. And overwhelmingly, the safe system approach continues to be one of those topics. So we thought we'd take the time to try out this new format with you all, which is 3 webinars in one day. This is session 2, our second webinar for the day on safer road users in the rural context. If you missed session 1, no worries absolutely at all. We have recorded that and it will be available on our website within the week. Additionally, session 3 that's coming up a little bit later, same thing. We will be recording that. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you at that one as well. We have a few logistics for you for today's webinar. It will be an hour and a half long. To activate your closed captioning for the webinar, you can click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. You can see what that icon looks like here on the screen right now on the slide. You can also use the drop down at that same button to adjust the captions under the caption setting. As I just mentioned a minute ago, we will be recording this webinar for archival on our website. It will show up both on the webinar archive page as well as on the page for the mini virtual conference. Because we have so many of you joining us today, and we will be using our chat pod to drop in our participant workbook and a few of the links for today, as well as some of the expertise and questions we'll be asking you all to share as well. If you do have questions for any of our presenters today, please put those in the Q&A pod so we make sure that we see them and can ask those at the end of their presentations. You can also use the Q&A pod to alert the organizers of any technical difficulties you may be having. That, again, helps us see them more quickly. The handout will be posted in the chat pod in just a few minutes, and we will have a feedback form at the end of today's webinar. If you could give us some feedback on whether or not you like this new format that we're trying out, and also what types of topics you may want to see if we do this format again. We do provide certificates of completion for our webinars, and for this mini conference, they come out about 4 to 6 weeks after we complete it. When you do receive that email with the certificate, you will also get a link in the email to apply for the more formal CEUs that Montana State University provides, if you do in fact need those. In session 2 for today on safer road users in the rural context, we're going to hear about how to implement a rural-focused program for safer road users, promising practice for preventing impaired driving in rural areas, and also narratives and message frames to employ towards inspiring more people in rural communities to better understand and appreciate road safety improvements. Our very first speaker today will be Brandy Brubaker. She joined the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles Highway Safety Office in 2024 as Director of the Highway Safety Strategy. She leads a dynamic team of highway safety professionals dedicated to saving lives through the development of data-driven strategies and programs and multifaceted marketing campaigns designed to change behaviors and prevent crashes before they occur. A DMV employee since 2014, Brandy previously worked in the agency's communications office, serving as Director of Communications and spokesperson. She started her career as a crime reporter, writing award-winning pieces for newspapers in Pittsburgh and West Virginia. She's a Pennsylvania native. She earned a journalism degree from Penn State University And I'm excited now to turn our presentation over to Brandy.
Hi there, everybody. I hope you can see my screen okay.
Yes, we can.
And I am live here from a small town in sunny but freezing cold Virginia today. So thank you, Jamie, for that introduction, and thank you to the National Center for Rural Road Safety for the invitation to be here. Like Jamie said, I am from the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles Highway Safety Office, and today I'm going to talk with you about Virginia's Country Road Safely Home Initiative. Uh, if there's any John Denver fans out there, you might get the little bit of a reference there. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why we launched it, what the data and rural residents are telling us, and how our Highway Safety Office is working alongside our many wonderful partners across Virginia's broader safety community. So that's me. I'm Brandy. This topic is very near and dear to my heart because I was born and raised in a small rural town in Pennsylvania called Brockway. Population 2,000, a glass plant town, one stoplight, no McDonald's or cable TV until I was a teenager. Seriously, no MTV, none of that. It's home of the Brockway Old Fashioned 4th of July celebration. The photo on the screen is me, my cousins, and our neighbor on our own country road on my first day of kindergarten in 1984. That dates me a little bit. It's the kind of road that gets tarred and chipped instead of paved, no yellow lines, and until the 1990s, didn't even have a name. People are either terrified of its curves or they drive it like it's a racetrack. In the winter, like right now, it's a sheet of ice and it's one of the last roads to be plowed. They got 14 inches of snow over the weekend. And this is what rural roads look like for millions of Americans. And they shape how people drive, how fast they go, and what feels normal behind the wheel. And since we're talking today about crashes on rural roads, last winter, my parents woke up to find this pickup truck crashed and abandoned in their front yard. We have our suspicions about what happened there. But what struck me was how familiar the scene felt. Not on a highway, not in a city, on a quiet country road right outside the house where I grew up. Just for balance, this is the truck that's usually parked in that same yard. It's a 1930 Ford Model A that my dad rebuilt into a showpiece. If you haven't spent much time in a rural community, you might not know its heart. But if you grew up or live in a rural town, feel free to throw a heart in the chat for me. People are friendly. They'll give you the shirt off their back. Life moves a little slower, but that also comes with a risk. Some people don't buckle up because they're just going down the road. Some think it's okay to drive after a few beers because it's late, taking the back way home. And speeding on a country road feels safe when you think you know every curve. But when a rural community loses someone, it hits differently. Everyone knows them. They're a neighbor, a classmate, a coworker, a cousin. Rural roads don't just connect places, they connect people. In 2024 in Virginia, 455 people lost their lives in crashes on rural, non-interstate roads. 455. That's 455 families whose lives were permanently changed. And that represents half of all traffic deaths in Virginia. Half of all fatalities occurred on rural, non-interstate roads, even though only about 1/4 of vehicle miles are traveled there. Rural roads are disproportionately deadly, and they deserve focused attention. So why are rural crashes more deadly? The Federal Highway Administration points to three major factors: riskier driving behaviors, simpler road designs, and longer emergency response times. For the Highway Safety Office, this has helped clarify where we can make the greatest contribution. Our core mission is always centered on the human side of safety, encouraging safer choices, supporting law enforcement efforts, investing in education and outreach, and helping communities address the behaviors that put people at risk. And those efforts, they matter deeply on rural roads, where speeding, impairment, and seatbelt non-use continue to drive so much of the harm we see. At the same time, we also recognize that behavior never exists on its own. Roads, vehicles, and emergency response all shape what happens when a crash occurs. That's where the safe system approach is helpful for us. not as something we lead alone by any means, but as a shared way to work alongside our many wonderful partners so that safer behavior, safer speeds, safer vehicles, safer roads, and stronger post crash care can reinforce one another. When we look closely at rural crash data in Virginia, a few factors consistently stand out, and they point us directly to the behaviors that remain central to rural safety. 46% involve speeding, 52% involve people not wearing seatbelts, 37% involve alcohol. These numbers reinforce where the Highway Safety Office focuses much of its work on speeding, impairment, and occupant protection. Every one of these represents daily decisions. And when safer choices are supported by visible enforcement, consistent messaging, and trusted local partnerships, lives are saved. The demographics tell an equally important story. 3 out of 4 people killed on rural non-interstate roads in Virginia are men. Half of those are either ages 20 to 34 or 65 and older. So that's my brother and my dad. One uses Snapchat, one doesn't know what Snapchat is. Different generations, different risks, different influences. And that tells us that generic messaging won't work. Rural safety requires targeted, culturally relevant approaches built around how real people use these roads. So up to this point, I've talked a lot about crash data, but numbers only tell part of the story. So last year, we also went directly to rural Virginians through surveys and focus groups to get a better understanding of how people who live on these roads see risk, how they see safety, and how they see their own driving. One of the strongest and most consistent themes we heard was about speed. Rural residents overwhelmingly told us that speed is the behavior they find most concerning on their roads. They see it, they experience it. We also heard loud and clear that cell phone use is everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere. People talked about distracted driving as something they encounter daily. And the third insight may be the most important. Over and over, people told us, I'm a safe driver. But in the same conversations, they often minimized behavior like speeding a little or not buckling up on short trips. So this tells us something critical for our strategy. Most rural drivers don't see themselves as risky. They see themselves as experienced, familiar with the roads, in control. That means our work can't be about blaming or lecturing, nagging. It has to be about meeting people where they are, connecting everyday behaviors to real risk and making the safer choice the easy, normal, supported choice. These insights are now shaping our campaigns, our community pilots, and our outreach. So after working closely with our DMV data team and our partners at Virginia Tech, we launched Country Road Safely Home last year with an initial goal of reducing rural road fatalities by 10% by 2025. That meant moving from 455 deaths in 2024 to 410 in 2027. Now, I say this is an initial goal because across the country and in Virginia, preliminary 25 data showed overall declines in fatalities across the country, many jurisdictions, and across our state. But we saw even greater reductions on rural non-interstate roads, roughly 24% fewer fatalities last year. And that's amazing. We're so excited. So we've already beat our goal. But so because of that, we've sharpened our focus and we're working to set a new goal, something that measures our progress in a different way. And as we move forward, we are placing even greater emphasis on the areas where the Highway Safety Office can most directly drive change, increasing seatbelt use, supporting rural enforcement, speeding and impairment, and beginning to more intentionally support post-crash care in rural communities. We continue to track fatalities, and by no means are we, taking credit for that already beating our goal. We're excited that the numbers are really down that far, but we know that our work is just beginning. So we're also closely watching behavior change and conditions that influence whether a rural crash becomes a fatal one. Country Roads Safely Home started as a rural behavior and outreach strategy, and at its core, that's still a lot of what it is. Our primary work lives in prevention, supporting safer choices, strengthening education and outreach, and beginning to invest more intentionally in post-crash survivability efforts. We use the safe system approach as a shared framework to help connect that work with what our partners are leading across Virginia. Safe people is where the Highway Safety Office is most deeply invested. We focus heavily on rural seatbelt use, impaired driving, speeding, distraction. For Country Road Safely Home specifically, we've launched a new statewide seatbelt campaign called Impact, designed specifically to resonate with rural drivers. It stars a young man who um, gets into a crash, but his life is saved because he chose to buckle up. We've expanded our local heroes outreach using trusted first responders and community voices as messengers. We partnered with NASCAR driver Ross Chastain and a nonprofit in Virginia called Drive Smart Virginia to reach rural race fans with a safe driving message. We brought the buckle up, phone down message into high school championships statewide because those habits start really early. And we're launching targeted pilots in rural counties with persistently low seatbelt use. One area we are intentionally growing into is post-crash care. Rural outcomes are heavily influenced by what happens after a crash. We've begun supporting the space by partnering with Virginia Commonwealth University Health to expand their rural trauma team development course and Stop the Bleeds program. And this year, we'll also begin to stand up rural community coalitions, bringing together law enforcement, EMS, transportation, public health, schools, and local leaders, not to direct the system, but to better connect it. Because rural safety only improves when the full network works together. We're fortunate in Virginia to have a lot of great partners from the Virginia Department of Transportation, the Virginia State Police, the Virginia Department of Education and Health, VASAP, other state and local agencies, local law enforcement, and our many nonprofits working hard within the communities they serve. So in closing, I will thank you for your time, and I'll invite you to connect with us. If you want to share project ideas, partnership opportunities, ask a question, my email address is on the screen. And thank you for what you do, and thank you for being part of the work to ensure that everyone, no matter how far off the beaten path they live, makes it home safely. Country Roads, safely home.
Thank you so much, Brandy. And we do have a few questions that have come up for you that I'm going to ask. Just a note so that you know, your audio is breaking up a little bit every once in a while. But we'll see if we can get through a couple of these questions for you. The very first one is, has enforcement of the seatbelts use diminished in general?
Virginia, we are very lucky that this year we are a secondary enforcement state, but starting in July of 2025, I guess last year now, we got a new law that requires occupants to buckle up no matter what seat they're in. So it added rear seatbelt use to the mix. It was the Christopher King seatbelt law. So we're very fortunate that now you have to buckle up no matter where you are in the vehicle. If you're an adult, of course, children always had to. So we're excited to see the results of that new law and to see if that increases enforcement for seatbelt use.
You also talked a little bit about a report, or I'm sorry, you talked a little bit about surveys and focus groups. Do you have a report out that shares some of the information from those surveys and focus groups that you could share with everyone?
We don't have it posted anywhere, but if anyone would like to see a copy, I'm happy to share. Just drop me an email.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another question that we had for you is, what does it mean to partner with someone? Is this a financial relationship, or do they come to the community to speak? And what does a partner do, and how do you ask for it?
Yeah, so we partner with people in a lot of different ways. It can mean support in many different ways. Sometimes we provide, grant support to them. Other times we're working closely with different organizations where we'll do, for example, working with Ross Chastain and Drive Smart Virginia. We go out together to the racetracks and we're hosting community events and we get the message out together. So it completely varies on the situation.
Someone else would like to know if you have any programs to share the road with cyclists.
Share the road with cyclists.
Yes.
Um, yeah, we have a pedestrian and bicycle safety coordinator, a vulnerable road user coordinator that we have in our office, and she's always looking for opportunities to work with the bicycling community in Virginia. And we certainly welcome anyone that wants to work with us in that regard. We're always happy and looking for new partners.
Our next question is that you talked a little bit about your local heroes program. Could you mention a little bit more about that, please?
Happy to. Local Heroes is a program, it's a advertising campaign that we started out within different regions of Virginia to try to encourage people to buckle up by working directly with first responders and law enforcement in those communities. It was so popular, we did it several times in different communities that over last year or the year before, we decided to do it statewide, and we got different first responders from throughout the state and did an advertising campaign encouraging people to buckle up, slow down, and never drive impaired.
The next two questions kind of go together, so I'm going to ask them at once. The first part of it is, are you using paved shoulders as bike lanes along rural roads? And the second part is, are e-bikes an injury issue in your rural area?
Those are great questions. I could reach out and collect some more information and get back to the folks who are asking those questions for you.
Perfect. Thank you. One more question that we have for you, and then we have a question for the audience that I'll ask after that. So the last question for you is that IIHS research has shown that maximum speed limits on interstates may impact speeds and crash rates on adjacent rural roads. Have you seen this at all?
I am not familiar with that study, but I would love to see it. So if someone could drop that study to me, I'd love to take a look.
Perfect. Thank you. So if the requester, if you have a link to that study by any chance and want to drop that in the chat, that would be fantastic. The question that we had for the audience, in case there's anyone out there that are planners from Florida, the requester is wondering how you handle the state performance measure 1, target 0 for fatal and serious injury crashes. I'm going to release this right now so you'll be able to see it in the question and answer section. And if there are any planners from Florida that have experience with this and would like to drop that in the chat, that would be fantastic. I do see we have a request to drop Brandy's email into the chat. I will put that in there for everyone. And we will post the participant workbook again as well. So thank you, Brandy. We really appreciate you talking today about your new program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The next speaker that we have is Jennifer Simone. She is the Vice President of Engineering and Behavioral Science at Toxel, a small business that focuses on transportation engineering and research and addressing public health concerns for the public sector. Jennifer is the principal investigator primarily for projects that focus on identifying successful strategies to reduce drug and alcohol impaired driving. She is one of the contributing researchers and authors of the NHTSA publication, Resources to Prevent Impaired Driving in Rural Areas. And we're excited to have her on here today to talk a little bit more about that resource. Jennifer?
Thank you. I will start off by saying I seem to be having some Zoom issues today, and it keeps kicking me out and then letting me right back in. So if I do pause for a second, that is why. Thank you for having me present today. Like Brandy, I am in freezing cold Virginia. I am in Northern Virginia, but I'm also in a unique county where you turn right out of my neighborhood and it's a completely suburban area. You turn left out of my neighborhood and it's rural. So we get to see a whole mix of different crashes and crash types and people learning how to drive on all different types of roads around here. So as mentioned, I was one of the researchers and authors of the NHTSA report, Resources to Prevent Impaired Driving in Rural Areas, on which this presentation is based. My colleague, Carrie Redden, who is listening to this webinar, was the project manager and also a researcher and author. And my colleague, Steve Jackson, was also a contributor to the report. Nicole Booker was a NHTSA contracting officer representative for the NHTSA task order. Today, I'll spend a few minutes discussing the background of the research effort, the methodology of how we identified the promising practices, and then spend most of the time talking about some examples of promising practices, including some themes across the programs. So this project involved identifying and describing promising practices to prevent impaired driving in rural United States. There were several components. First, we reviewed secondary data to better understand the rural impaired driving problem. We then conducted an initial scan geared towards identifying a broad initial list of programs, and then narrowed it down to 8 programs of which to collect more information through stakeholder interviews. Last, we summarized those findings into a final report, and I'll provide the link to the report at the end of this presentation. And I will say that this presentation just briefly describes all of these programs, but the report does provide much more detail about the programs as well as appendices with more information. So we began by identifying promising practices to prevent impaired driving in rural areas, which involved conducting a review primarily online of rural programs and initiatives. We looked for innovative approaches and how they were tailored to address local needs. We also looked for strategic partnerships and creative approaches to expand a program's reach. And we did this through a variety of sources, including consulting with an expert panel with deep expertise and knowledge in rural and impaired driving programs. We documented only those results that were specific to rural areas, leading to the identification of 15 promising practices. Our documentation included locations that had implemented the practices, findings if the practice had been evaluated, resources for further information, and points of contact. We documented only those results that were specific to rural areas, leading to the identification of 15 promising practices. This screen shows the promising practices, the list of 15 that we had identified. Like I said, they were all limited to rural areas. We did try to include tribal practices and all different types of programs. For the purposes of the final report, we then narrowed the list to 8 programs for further study. These programs were selected based on input from the expert panel and the availability of information online, identifying sites where the programs have been implemented, indication that the programs had been in place in those sites for several years, measures of success, and contact information for a program manager or a point of contact. Other factors that were considered included ease of program replication, scalability of the program based on available staff and funding, and activities that go beyond just enforcement and focus on education and rehabilitation as well. So these are the 8 programs that were selected and the people that we spoke with to find out more information about the program. Of these programs, only 1 contact could not be reached for the San Carlos Apache Tribal Motor Vehicle Injury Program. And so the case study was developed based on existing literature found online. However, even though we couldn't find a point of contact for this program, we did intentionally want to keep this program on the list as it was a program specific to tribal lands, and we did want to make sure that we did include tribal lands within the document. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes highlighting information that we learned about each of these programs. Just given the time constraints, I'm just going to focus on providing a brief summary of the program, its goals, and some of the outcomes. And like I said, much more details can be found in the final report. So the first program is BASSET, which is Responsible Beverage Service Training in Illinois. BASSET stands for Beverage Alcohol Sellers and Server Education and Training, which is an example of responsible beverage service training program. Responsible beverage service training aims to provide servers the necessary skills to responsibly serve alcoholic beverages and mitigate alcohol-related harm. BASSET is managed by the Illinois Liquor Control Commission. And the purpose of the program is to train and educate sellers and servers to engage in responsible alcohol service, including spotting signs of intoxication, and using different intervention techniques to prevent DUIs and alcohol-related fatalities, as well as stopping underage drinking. So the program involves different training programs for managers and owners of establishments that sell liquor, and then servers. The programs for managers and owners provides guidance on how to implement service policies and practices. And then the programs for servers focus on knowledge and skills to help prevent customers from excessive consumption of alcohol, and then to be able to recognize when overconsumption has occurred. As of July 1st, 2018, all on-premise alcohol servers are mandated to take BASSET training in Illinois. In 1991, the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Illinois Department of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse worked to standardize the program across the state with the goal of preventing confusion among different municipalities regarding what should be included in the training, and then eventually mandating the training through state statute. Implementing the program requires ongoing partnerships. The Illinois Liquor Control Commission has a strong partnership with law enforcement to aid in enforcement of the regulations and then also educate them about the components. They hold periodic training with law enforcement to ensure new officers are up to date and help them know how to ask the right questions of alcohol sellers and servers to ensure that they are following the BASSET requirements. The commission also maintains strong relationships with business owners and managers to inform them about the importance of BASSET and how it benefits their business through improved customer service, saving money on liquor liability insurance, and ensuring they are compliant with state liquor laws and local ordinances. As a result of this program, BASSET educated managers and servers come away well equipped to do their job and assist in the effort to reduce impaired driving. The next campaign, and I should mention too, I think everybody has a copy of the slides, and same thing for in the report. The headings on these slides are links to more information directly to these different program websites. So the next one is Parents Who Host Lose the Most, which is a social host campaign that was implemented in Tuscarawas County, Ohio. Parents Who Host Lose the Most is a public health media campaign. It was initially launched in 2000 by the Prevention Action Alliance, an Ohio-based organization designed to educate parents about the dangers of serving alcoholic beverage to minors. Since its creation, the campaign has been used by organizations in all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and internationally. For this project, we looked specifically at how the campaign was implemented in Tuscarawas County, a primarily rural county in Ohio, by an organization called Empower Tusk. Empower Tusk encourages local youth to live healthy, drug-free lives by ensuring consistent access to support, education, and resources for youth, parents, businesses, and local communities. They launched their initial Parents Who Host Lose the Most campaign in 2012 with the 4 goals that are showing on the screen here: raise awareness about social hosting for parents and underage drinking, educating parents about the concerns about underage drinking, building capacity in their coalition, and changing community norms around alcohol. The campaign uses outreach materials such as press releases, newspaper ads, social media ads, PSAs, yard signs, banners in schools and downtown with the message of parents who host lose the most. Don't be a party to underage drinking. It's against the law. The Prevention Action Alliance makes these outreach materials available for purchase, and then individual campaigns have free rights to make changes to the materials as needed after they are purchased. Within Tuscarawas County, Parents Who Host Lose the Most has given Empower Tusk the opportunity to educate parents about the dangers of serving alcoholic beverages to minors. Because there was no baseline data about how many parents served alcohol to minors prior to the campaign, it's not really possible to do an evaluation of how the program has been successful. But they do believe that it has been successful in, at a minimum, generating conversations and awareness among families. In terms of the original statewide campaign, telephone surveys in 2006 showed that 55% of parents and youth had heard messages about underage drinking. And about 2/3 who heard the message said it had prompted a conversation between parents and their teenagers about drinking. The next program is Reduce TN, or Teen Crashes, a teen education program in Tennessee, which teaches teens in Tennessee about the dangers of drinking and driving. It also focuses on other risky behaviors such as not wearing seatbelts, texting and driving, speeding, and drowsy driving, and sharing the roads with pedestrians and bicyclists. It was launched in 2013, developed by Tennessee Tech University with a traffic safety grant from the Tennessee Highway Safety Office. The goal was to develop a program that involved many partners in highway safety across the state. The Governor's Highway Safety Association publication, Curbing Teen Driver Crashes, an in-depth look at state initiatives, loosely guided the development of the program. Tennessee Tech used the safety grant to develop marketing materials to raise awareness of the Reduce Teen Crashes program and produce handout materials such as signs, posters, and cards for participating schools. The grant was also used to develop the program website, which provides information on the program and also serves as a portal for schools to enter activities and track their points. The main premise of the program is that participating schools compete against each other and strive to earn points for completing various traffic safety activities in their school and community. The healthy competition helps motivate schools to provide more hands-on learning opportunities for their students throughout the year. Although the program is open to all schools in Tennessee, schools in rural counties account for the majority of participation in the program. Some examples of impaired driving related activities include impaired driving goggles, where schools can borrow goggles from the program, National Drug and Alcohol Facts Week promoted by the school, Arrive Alive Tour, which is a program that can be requested by the schools, and then a web-based program that educates about the effect of cannabis on the teenage brain. Most of the activities make use of free resources and do not incur any costs to participating schools. The next program is Safe Cab, which is a program that took place in Isanti County, Minnesota. It began in 2005 as part of an effort of the Towards Zero Deaths Traffic Safety Coalition. It included a number of community stakeholders and a local drug who tracked the last place of drink in his courtroom. And they wanted to figure out how to provide safe transportation alternatives for patrons of local bars and restaurants who were drinking and then driving home. To get the program started, they held a meeting with a group of bar owners, the judge, and the local police department. And there was also a new cab company in town who was interested in participating. To pay for the rides, leaders reached out to local beer distributors who, after initial pushback, have continued to support and fund the program. The judge who helped support the program, he was tracking the last place of drink by defendants pleading guilty to DWI charges in his courtroom. And so by doing so, he was able to identify bars more likely to overserve patrons and identify opportunities to reach out to those bars to raise awareness of potential dangers of letting unsafe patrons leave and drive. If he identified a number of DWI defendants coming from a specific bar or restaurant, he would then stop by that bar to bring up this program to the owner. Patrons of the participating bars or restaurants can request a ride from a safe cab. Bar owners and bartenders can also suggest customers take a safe cab ride. The patron then calls the cab and fills out a paper voucher either at the restaurant or in the cab if the venue has run out of vouchers. Program participants can then retrieve their vehicle from the restaurant the next day. Safe Cab uses a number of ways to share information about the program, including providing participating bars and restaurants with signage and table tents that feature messages such as "Ask your server about Safe Cab," which there's an example showing on the screen. There's billboard ads, radio interviews, and many of their messages encourage people to plan ahead and leave their vehicles at home. In Minnesota winters, vehicles left overnight can be a problem due to snow, but Safe Cab created a bright orange sign labeled Safe Cab Participant. Bar or restaurants put the date on the sign, and program participants put the sign in their windshield. And then if the city or county has to plow, their vehicle will not be ticketed or towed. The 3 beer distributors in the county pay a one-time tax-deductible lump sum of $3,000 per year. Bars are billed monthly for $5 per ride, and the county has signed a contract with Safe Cab to provide a certain number of rides per year. The program has been a great success. Isanti County from 2005 to 2021 has seen DWIs drop by 70%. In the final report, there is an appendix with an article called "How to Start a Safe Cab" with information on how to start a similar service. The next slide is the Western North Carolina DWI Task Force. This began as a small local DWI task force in 2005 and expanded into a regional DWI task force the following year. It consists of over 30 cross-disciplinary members that include victims, advocates, district attorneys, police officers, prosecutors, representatives from the Wildlife Resources Commission, Fraternal Order of Police, and lawmakers. They develop an annual strategic plan that outlines their legislative agenda and plans for lawmaker education, as well as public outreach and DWI raising efforts. They also work with local media to highlight county DWI conviction rates and use this opportunity to highlight the strong work of some counties and then encourage other counties to invest more time, training, or education and work if their rates are lower. They work with law enforcement to hold a candlelight blue light vigil every year on Thanksgiving Eve to highlight the date and location a victim died or was seriously injured because somebody was driving while impaired. And then the San Carlos Apache Tribal Motor Vehicle Injury Prevention Program in Arizona. As I mentioned, we were unable to speak with anyone about this program, so all information was found online. But this involved a comprehensive approach to decrease alcohol-impaired driving and increase restraint use in tribal areas. It leveraged strong partnerships among public health, law enforcement, and the tribal community. It began in 2004 and continued for nearly a decade. And its initial strategies focused on high visibility sobriety checkpoints accompanied by an awareness-raising mass media campaign. It began with a CDC grant to develop and implement a multi-pronged approach based on interventions selected from the Guide to Community Preventative Services. It then expanded its scope to it first focused on impaired driving and then expanded the scope to increase occupant protection. It included a 390 task force, and 390 is the police code often used for drunk, that planned and implemented high visibility DUI checkpoints. They championed important policy changes to better protect public safety. They lowered the presumption of alcohol impairment from BAC of 0.10 to 0.08. And then they established a primary occupant restraint law for the San Carlos Apache Reservation. And then we have 2 more programs. The Regional DWI Court Program in Michigan. Rural DWI courts, such as Michigan's Regional DWI Court Program, are a type of problem-solving court that crosses jurisdictional boundaries to work to address the substance use disorders of non-violent offenders. As Michigan's 2011 Ignition Interlock pilot program gained success, eligible participants in rural areas also wanted to access DWI courts to utilize Ignition Interlock monitoring to maintain their driving privileges. but many rural jurisdictions did not have the resources or number of impaired driving offenders to enable them to staff a full-time DWI court. In 2013, Michigan began piloting regional driving while intoxicated courts in 4 rural areas that collectively covered 16 counties that previously had limited access to DWI courts. In addition to an ignition interlock program, they employed a number of interventions, such as intensive judicial supervision, treatment, sanctions, incentives, drug and alcohol testing, and other individualized services. Through these interventions, rural DWI programs were able to work with offenders to address their substance use disorders and reduce the likelihood of reoffense. The Michigan Supreme Court was a critical partner in bringing these rural courts together. They published a manual that outlines the steps for establishing a regional DWI court. Funding is provided through the Michigan Drug Court Grant Program. And 70% of the people who enter the program end up completing it. And then the 24/7 sobriety program in South Dakota targets repeat offenders by offering alcohol and drug testing as an alternative to jail time. In 2005, the program was piloted in South Dakota and expanded across the state. It has since been extensively evaluated and adopted by several other states. It is a drug and alcohol testing program for repeat offenders who have previously committed alcohol or drug-related crimes. Participants agree to submit to twice daily alcohol testing every day as part of their bond agreement or a condition of their release after conviction. If a participant does not show up for testing or if they test positive, then they are subject to swift, certain, and fair sanctions, usually a day or 2 of jail time. Once they are released from jail, the same bond conditions are applied. Excuse me. In a recent study of 24/7 program outcomes in South Dakota, it was found strong evidence that the program participation reduced criminal activity at 12 months after the initial arrest and potentially longer term. It was also found that counties with active 24/7 sobriety programs experience lower rates of DWI and drug-related crimes, which they believe are likely due to the program's success. So as part of this project, we analyzed themes across the promising practices to better understand key factors for success, guidance for local and state jurisdictions, and considerations for a locality looking to start this work. Some common themes or success factors for many of these programs include understanding and responding to the needs and culture of the community where the program is implemented. Programs cannot take place in a vacuum, but need to be responsive of the community and locality where they are happening. It is important to understand what is important to the community to better anticipate challenges, identify how to best communicate with the community, and determine what messages will resonate with the community. It is important to develop strong partnerships, bring multidisciplinary partners to the table to help introduce a variety of perspectives, to help problem solve and anticipate issues that might arise. Consider resources available and what partners can bring to the table. Localities can think creatively about resources that are needed for a particular program being considered and what potential partners might be able to contribute to help. Start small, learn how to implement a program and what logistics are needed by piloting approach on a small scale first to figure out how to do it best and what tweaks need to be made before scaling up. And assess the effectiveness of a program. Build in a system to evaluate the effectiveness of the process and overall outcomes of the program. Evaluation can be key in understanding how to do things better and whether a program is ultimately worth the time and financial resources expended. And then we also came up with some guidance for local and state jurisdictions. Engage your state's highway safety office. They may have the resources to bring to the table and can potentially offer expertise, materials, programs, funding, and other resources that may be harder for rural areas to come by on their own. Understand what laws and regulations are in place and how they might apply to the program being considered. Not all judges or magistrates may know about or have confidence in certain sentencing conditions. Judicial partners are important to engage when exploring potential programmatic solutions. And consider system changes. Think about systemic and policy levers that can be changed or more uniformly implemented to strengthen a locality's response to DWIs. And then we also outlined some considerations and first steps for localities to take when thinking through what program best addresses the needs in their communities. Collect and use data to describe the program. Bring the data to life. Think about how it could be portrayed to help tell a story. Take the time to get the buy-in needed. Involve key stakeholders in the planning process. And also, it is easier to get stakeholder buy-in if they're involved from the beginning. And then assess best and promising practices and determine what practices to use to address the needs of the community. So finally, just some acknowledgements up here. In addition to the people we interviewed for the 8 promising practices, these are the people that served on the expert panel. As you can see, they provided both a national and local perspective, many with boots on the ground experience that inform their input. And then here is the link to the final report. So thank you, and I will take questions at this point.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I did drop the link into the chat pod for anyone who needs the link as well. Our first question for you is on the safe cabs example that you shared. Was there ever discussion that the user pays some percent of that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. On the safe cabs example, was there ever a discussion about the user paying for a portion of the cab ride?
I believe there was a part of it was a user percentage of paying, but I think the majority of it was the bar paying for it.
And this next question goes with that as well. It's a little bit longer. It says, for the Safe Cab program, you mentioned that beer distributors paid a one-time lump sum each year. Bars were billed monthly per ride, and the county contracted with Safe Cab to provide rides annually. Since bars were responsible for paying for the ride, how were they held accountable? For example, was there any concern that bars might discourage patrons from using the service to reduce their costs?
That did not come up in the discussion about any, in terms of the bars discouraging patrons from using the service. I think there was, in planning this program, they made sure to get a lot of, buy-in from the bars for the program. And I'm going back through the report now to look for this. And I know Carrie Reddit is on helping to answer some questions as well and typing those into the chat. But I think that bars really worked with the stakeholders that helped, plan this. And I think that they saw their liability in letting people, drive home impaired. And so they understood the need for them to participate in this program as well to, prevent liability on their part.
The next question we had for you is about the 24/7 sobriety program in South Dakota. They're wondering, besides testing, did they provide social supports to help the person address reasons that may be causing them to make poor decisions, like driving under the influence?
I'm looking through as well for that. Yes, they did. So they did work with offenders to help them change their behaviors. A part of it was kind of public health and social work with them. They worked with them on substance abuse and mental health services, the Department of Social Services. So a big part of it was getting them to change their behaviors, and keeping them out of jail, and providing support to them, especially for high risk offenders.
And then the very last question we have for you is, does the final report cover marijuana as well? They noticed that some of the examples you went over were generally centered around alcohol use.
Most of this was focused mostly on alcohol use.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you again for sharing all of that information. I did drop the resource link again into the chat pod. It's a fantastic resource, has a lot of great examples in there for you to take a look at. We get a lot of questions at the center about what are some ways to combat and educate about impaired driving. And so this is one of those great resources to take a look at for that. Our next speaker will be Seth Lajeunesse. He joined the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center as a research associate in 2010. Seth evaluates behavioral interventions designed to enhance bicycle and pedestrian safety and access, and designs studies that draw from psychology, sociology, and systems science. He primarily focuses on studying youth traffic safety and discerning ways to accelerate the diffusion of effective road safety practice. Seth has a certificate of advanced graduate studies in school psychology from Duquesne University and a master's degree in city and regional planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm excited to turn it over now to Seth.
Thanks so much, Jamie. And thank you to you and the Rural Road Safety Center for the invitation to join everybody today. I'm very excited to share with you some of what I've been working on over the last decade or so with respect to how can we foment a pro-regulatory culture, or at least have enough people in the population that see what we're trying to do with safety in terms of improving road safety and the policies that we're putting in place, that they support them, that they see the value in such things. So that's a lot about what I'll talk about today, and especially as it relates to rural communities and rural contexts. I'll start with just a few basic premises to get us started. One is that, again, in our research, understanding where people are really coming from, people truly do care deeply about safety, in particular, safety of their closest, the people closest to them, their family members, close friends, freedom, looking out for one another. These are neighbors in rural communities, in rural villages and such. We're finding that that is certainly true. Yet when we think about transportation, we often take sort of a technocratic crack at this to really describe what's happening out there. So it's often described in terms of metaphors that we see, which is really interesting from a language perspective, right? Like traffic as water, a flow or congestion, right? We hear about traffic flow, we hear about congestion all the time. Roads as akin to arteries in the human body are like evoking that in the term arterial road. What these seem to do in psychology is quietly steer us towards this idea that speed and traffic volume and expansion are really imperative matters rather than the safety of people out on the roadways. So I'm just going to argue today that essentially language is quite powerful in that it doesn't just describe our transportation problems. It defines what counts as a problem and what solutions seem reasonable. We're going to get into more detail what we mean by that. Some examples are when we think about crashes and they're framed as individual mistakes. This person was driving inebriated. This person was crossing outside of a marked crosswalk. This ignores systemic fixes, right? This is something that blames the individual, focuses it solely on them, and therefore we miss the broader system in which these things are occurring. And then when we think about danger as but when we think about it as being framed as designed, prevention becomes possible and desirable, right? So we're thinking that there are just inherent dangers out there on our roads, the way they are and the way they interact with our land uses and with our vehicle technologies and such. They are sort of designed into the system. And if we focus there, then we can see that change is possible. Which brings us to, I'm going to segue us directly to human values. This is a theory that has been widely applied over the last 40 years. And in a number of cultural contexts, this seems to be a universal construct about human values. And you see here that this is organized in what these psychologists call circumflex, or really just a circle, and how these are arranged in a circle from intrinsic on one side and extrinsic on another. And we'll talk about the structure of these, but you'll see that the more intrinsic, or things that are valuable in and of themselves, these are basically an end to themselves, self-direction, being able to be self-governed and feel like we're choosing our own actions. Universalism or concern and care for all people and even for nature. And then for benevolence, this is care and concern for those closest to us. And then we have what we would see is like extrinsic on the other end of this circle here, right? And sort of on the opposite end, if you will. These are usually a means to an end. So power, fame, money, wealth, achievement according to certain social standards. You can kind of see how this is more extrinsic to the person. These aren't inherently gratifying, but instead are a means to get to further gratification. So it's interesting the way these are arranged, though. They're in that circle for a purpose. They're arranged mentally in that circumplex. And what's interesting, if we look at the ones closer to each other, they enhance each other or spill over to one another. So you can see how benevolence or concern for close others might relate to also concern for our neighbors, our coworkers and colleagues, right? A more expansive sort of concern for people. And then likewise for power, if we're looking to dominate our time, finances, you can see that might relate to security around us feeling more stable. And then on the opposite side, they suppress each other. So again, we look back into this circle, we see if we have a major, our values are being appealed to for power and dominance. You can see how that might relate to a suppression of care for other folks, that sort of thing. If we're dominating people, we can't really care for them now, can we? And what's interesting about the literature on this too is that, like muscles, the more we appeal to or engage with certain values, the more they're strengthened. So if we appeal more to those power values, we'll have more people looking, basically privileging power values over maybe universalism or benevolence values. So why does this matter? Well, what's interesting about values is that they are sort of like beliefs coupled with emotion. They really help us evaluate what we feel is good, fair, or worth pursuing in life. And when we safety investments activate widely shared values, and in this case, in a lot of rural contexts, we see that stewardship of what we have in our communities, competence or being confident in what we're doing, and caring for neighbors. These things can actually render what would otherwise be considered political more practical. But what's interesting about this is when we look at the way in which crashes or bad outcomes in our network are unfolding, we tend to have a certain pattern of reporting on this, right? So this one's a recent one from Louisville in southern Indiana, talking about snowy roads cause multiple crashes and traffic delays. This one, Marysville, we talk about I-5, the south, a vehicle crash that killed pedestrians, snarled traffic near Maryville. And then we have yet another about a person injured in a crash along I-240, causing traffic delays. So you can imagine there have been crashes, people have been killed or hurt, and yet we also hear that this is delaying traffic. So appealing to different value systems, right? And sort of neglecting the fact that, or equalizing traffic delays with people being harmed on the road, which is really unfortunate because this is a great way to get people to basically become inured to the problem by pitting these two value systems against one another. Related to values and that are always being appealed to is message framing. Really interesting to think about how the way messages are framed can really shape the way we think about a problem and shape our understanding about an issue. An example of this occurred, you might remember, when the estate tax, which is basically entitlement tax, or people that are quite wealthy and their estates are taxed to provide revenue for certain services, it became the death tax. And you can imagine how that turn of phrase, really just a subtle turn of phrase, can change the whole meaning of that program. Example in road safety would be, the pedestrian was wearing dark clothing when he was struck versus the crash, the fifth on this rural road in a month, as you can see on the right here, occurred in an area without good lighting, right? So the first case, the pedestrian wearing dark clothing, that becomes the focus. That's the frame, right? So now we're focusing on that. The reader, the listener is focusing on this and trying to address that perhaps. And the crash on the second frame on the rural road without good lighting, we see that crashes are pretty common there and that there's not good lighting. So that becomes the focus, right? Now the system is becoming the focus of intervention rather than the person. So I'm going to briefly introduce some of my favorite framing techniques. There's about 6 of them that I'll talk about. And just briefly get into what framing is not. So framing is not a sort of a purposeful education going systematically through a subject to actually teach people a novel subject, or voluntary action appeals like this one here, be safe, or be smart, drive safe, right? Be the driver who saves lives. This is not what we're talking about. It's a way to frame issues, again, to kind of motivate people to action. I think a lot of us are familiar with this first one, gain versus loss frame. So this is describing the consequences of an action or an inaction in terms of positive or negative outcomes. We can either talk about investing in bike infrastructure leading to a healthier population, or failure to invest in bike infrastructure leading to a less healthy population, right? So we frame it as a gain or we frame it as a loss. This can be quite powerful. Usually, depending on the personal level, loss frames tend to be quite powerful. Though on a policy level, population, we often lean toward gain frames. Order, usually we want to place positive aspects of what we're trying to persuade or introduce to people that is good. We want to front load those. We talk about introducing solutions early and often. There's just some good studies around there about when you just hear about an unknown person, the positive traits first, more likely to develop a sort of a positive appraisal of that person, versus if there was a negative trait first and then you ended with a positive trait. So usually starting first with the good news, the good of a subject is good practice. Metaphor can be quite powerful as well, right? And this is often making an issue concrete or experiential. Example from our world might be, sometimes police are framed as being warriors on the street. Versus police as being guardians. You can see how framing in just these different ways you might interact with or view police officers in different ways, in a different way, as being strong and overpowering versus helpful and protective. There's also lexical frames with just how we label things, how we turn a phrase, if you will. We talk a lot about how we improve road safety. What about if we talked about reducing road danger? What this can do is point us to design and policy as the problem. And what about calling people vulnerable? It's really interesting. We see what happens is this hides the systems that endanger them. We're talking about them being vulnerable, but the question is, why are they vulnerable? It's usually because the system's not designed to protect them. Another great one are pronouns, or using pronouns that either create or close distance, psychological distance from a subject, right? So in this case, we tend to promote a broad, generous we and us when articulating the need to prevent or address a problem. An example of this is we see it all the time is saying, we articulate what older adults need in our community. What about if we spoke about what we all need as we age, right? We're all aging, so this includes all of us now. Now everyone can see how this benefits them as well. Perhaps my favorite, though, are dynamic norms. I'm not sure if any of you have used these before. We have norms, right, about what people are doing now or recently. These are really cool because they're showing how things are changing. And we know that people are more open to change when they believe others are changing too. As an example, in terms of investment in walking and biking infrastructure, we see from 2012, less than half of rural residents in the U.S. supported sort of, increasing infrastructure for biking and walking. This number jumped in 2016 to a little over half, about 54% in favor of this infrastructure. And then more recently in 2025, a full two-thirds or 66% of rural residents supported active investment. So as you can see, it's growing over time. The support has been growing. This showing this support for safer communities with mobility options reduces fear of being that outlier. This is what people don't want to look silly being the only one in the room supporting something, right? Which finally leads me to a guide that I had the privilege of working on with some colleagues at Johns Hopkins University, also a close colleague here at UNC of ours in the School of Media and Journalism, as well as the AAA Foundation and ITE. We worked on this guide that was basically a framing guide around how we can speak about the policies in engineering countermeasures, other countermeasures that we're trying to put into place with community members to heighten understanding, but also support for them. Some literature review I had done on other public policies. These were broad scale policies across the board. If they looked like they were capable of addressing problems, it seemed to garner support. If they were broadly popular, if people seemed to like them, and they were also carefully monitored and ambitious. When they were addressing health problem, it seems like that was particularly related to health policy, and focused on the responsibility of institutions rather than individuals, what they can do. And then advancing non-economic. This one was interesting because this was for mostly the public rather than politicians. These people wanted to know about the health opportunities that a policy would, and the environmental. We used focus groups when we were to better understand where their mental models were with respect to safety and safety messaging. We also tested a variety of messages. We had a matrix of these in sort of an experimental fashion with these focus groups. So a little more than 60 people in total were a part of this. We included AAA offices who sort of work with communities to implement policy, and we heard what is really needed from them. And then we approached 5 different groups, more homogenous groups, with the idea that we want to hear from people in public safety, safety advocacy, and the road authorities. We want to hear a consensus from these different groups about what is going to resonate, what does resonate with them, and what has worked in their line of work. And what we found was from the AAA conversations that at this time there was limited public awareness and understanding of safe system principles, lack of political and social priority to invest in safety, and really an unwillingness to take political risks. So given that, they agreed that guidance on techniques to communicate the magnitude and urgency of the road injury crisis, brief, accessible explanations for how robust safety policies and engineering interventions work and benefit communities, and then framing of messages that would resonate with diverse audiences. So yes, this is what we were tasked with, given what they had articulated as being needed. So given all of this work, we, in the literature and everything else, we developed what we would call the Values, Solutions, Action, Messaging Framework. And I'll just step through each of these steps here, but you can see it begins with pro-social values. So you can imagine that and picture that circumflex in your mind around pro-social values, universalism, benevolence, self-direction, and choice, right? Pro-social values. Connect that to the actual solution that you're trying to sell or you're trying to prop up and explain to people. And then suggest an action. Give them basically a suggested action that they can do to demonstrate their support for the change, the intervention. So when we think about a rural context too, the general frames that we're probably targeting here are stewardship of our natural and our built landscapes, competence, looking out for neighbors. These are things that we found pretty crucial. An example is the safe system doesn't assume people are careless. It assumes everyone is human and makes sure one mistake doesn't cost a life. So we're talking about the value of life, and we want to make sure that a mistake doesn't end in a tragedy. So using this connection to explain the benefits of planned solutions, right? In a rural case, roads that forgive, tools that back us up. So again, we talked about mistakes that people might make. How do we create backup systems that people are protected? So rural roads are some of the most important shared tools the community has. Let's take care of these tools so they don't turn against us. So we have here a 2+1 road where you see this is a picture from Sweden, but I know these are applied in some places, especially like Texas, where you have alternating two lanes in one direction for a couple of miles, then it switches to one lane, and then on both sides. And in the middle is a cable median barrier, so that prevents the head-on crashes. What this does is includes sort of engagement, the driving task, right? So you have to be aware of when the road is switching from 2 to 1 and 1 to 2. And then you have the cable median barrier just to protect people, and also the edge line. You have the W beams at the edge here, the guardrails protecting people as well. And then action to demonstrate support for the improvements, right? So they want these in rural contexts and everywhere, really, locally chosen improvements. Feel like they're part of the conversation, right? Let's share with others our support for the community-chosen design of safe and useful roads, ones that invite us to use them in a variety of ways, whether it be biking, walking, or rolling and driving. So basically suggesting that we have choice now, and that this was our choice as well to institute these changes. So lastly, just some parting thoughts regarding the way we discuss and frame our work. Let's show people what a truly safe system is rather than what it isn't. We're constantly hearing about the injuries and deaths on our roads, and it's really important and critical to track these indicators of our functionality. But the public doesn't need to constantly be reminded about how unsafe it is. Let's talk about the fact that things are not good, but that we do have solutions, right? What does it look like to have these solutions? And then let's use a generous we and us when talking about improvements, because honestly, they do impact each of us. And in America, pragmatism is a core value. So let's inspire can-doism. Why not, right? By emphasizing that getting to the safe system is possible and would benefit us all. So with that, I thank you and certainly invite you to connect. I just leave my name and email here should you want to continue this conversation. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so very much, Seth. I know there's been a lot going on over in the chat pod. We do not have any questions right now in the Q&A. And if any were dropped over there in the chat pod, I have not seen them because of the amount of discussion going on. So if we have any questions for Seth or any of our other speakers, please drop those in the Q&A pod at this time. We'd really appreciate that. All right, Seth, so the first question we have for you is the framing discussion is very interesting. Do you have any resources that you can share to help us further educate ourselves on the topic?
Thank you, Jessica, for your question. Yes, I would say as an entree into the subject and something you could actually kind of dive into because they have a lot of material is the Frameworks Institute. Um, they provide a lot of great guidance on how we talk about any manner of social programs, social problems, that sort of thing. So highly recommend that. And thank you, Kevin, for linking that.
Perfect. Yes.
Frameworks Institute.
Thank you for dropping that in there. Um, Another question is less about content, and I think more about just if you've visited somewhere. Have you ever been to the Research Triangle Park in Wake County because you went to UNC Chapel Hill?
Yeah, yes, that is within the region. So I have certainly been to RTP. Um, yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about the experiences I've had there, the people I know who work there. It's a very interesting question.
So I want to thank all of our speakers today. Thank you all as well for joining us and for all of the amazing questions. If we have any last questions, go ahead and put those in our Q&A pod right now. We do have, as you all know, one more session in today's virtual mini conference that will be happening at 3 p.m. Eastern time on safer roads in the rural context. So we're excited to see you for that last one. Just a reminder again, I realize that we're having 3 of these sessions all throughout the day. If you weren't able to join us for all of them, no problem at all. We are recording them and we will be posting them on our website. Again, they will be on both our archived webinar page as well as on the mini virtual conference page as well. And all of the handouts will be available to be downloaded from there as well. All right, and with that, I'd like to thank our speakers one more time, and we will see you all hopefully again in about a half an hour at session 3. Thank you, Seth, Jennifer, and Brandy for sharing your expertise with us today.